Welcome to today's webinar entitled How Agile Software Development Practices Can Improve the Success of Test Automation Projects. Our presenter today is Brett Haas. Brett has nearly 20 years experience with software development projects. He's an expert in software test automation, having participated in and managed dozens of implementations. Brett will be drawing on his extensive personal experience today as he walks us through his learnings. Welcome, Brett.
Hello. Thank you, Rob, for that brilliant introduction. And hello, everybody. I hope everyone is doing well today. I do want to make a couple statements real quick as we get started. If going through this webinar, if anybody has any questions, do post those questions. And I will do my best at the end to get to some or all of those questions at the end of the webinar during our Q&A session. So with that, welcome. Agile Test Automation Development by Utopia Solutions. Important to understand a little bit about what this presentation is about and also what it's not about. So we're going to be teaching you about developing test automation frameworks using Agile methodologies. And I want to stress what we're not teaching is about Agile or test automation or how to test in an Agile dev environment. We're not talking about test automation principles, and don't get me wrong, I'm very passionate about those things, but that's not the focus of our talk today. Some assumptions we're making that you already understand the tools that you're using for automation. You understand some Agile principles. You're ready for automation. You've already chosen how you're going to approach your framework. If you're new to Agile, what did we have before that? It was waterfall. Go collect requirements. If you're a project manager, you go browbeat your team members until you collected those requirements, and then you start development. And I've seen this before, where a lot of companies, from an automation standpoint, are guilty of spending a lot of time building this beautiful framework. When they build it, in the end, it's not exactly what the customer wanted. It might be something absolutely beautiful, it works like a charm, but it isn't what the customer wants. And that's partly because what the customer wanted at the beginning isn't what they wanted in the end. Requirements change. And learning from that, we decided we would adopt Agile into our test automation development processes. And that's what we're talking about today. So, it's kind of handling that ADD world where things change all the time. Okay, talking about what Agile does for test automation development. Basically, we're answering the question, why choose Agile for test framework development? But I do want to talk about, we're going to talk about what it does do for test framework development, but I want to, stress what it doesn't do. It does not give you good test automation. It doesn't give you test data management, or it doesn't manage your environments. It doesn't choose your test automation tools. Those are all things you have to do yourself. You have to get them right. Agile offers some advantages, and that's what we're going to go through in this webinar. Okay, good automated design or good automation. If you hear me refer to that throughout the slides and the webinar, that's something that we're very passionate about. This is what we do. So Agile does not change the core principles of good automation. And certainly, if this is something that you're interested in or you'd like to know more about, then please do send us a note. Okay, so again, as I said, I've seen companies guilty of sort of taking this big bang approach to automation, where they take marching orders and then they go build a really great framework, but in the end, it's not aligned with what the customer wanted. And that could have been because objectives shifted or the business needs weren't known to begin with. And that's really what our principles are here to address. Agile is going to enable the following. It's going to enable three key things. It's going to enable automated testing during framework development. It's also going to enable, or really forces, customer involvement. And it's going to help with scope management. So we're going to dive into that next. And that's with our Agile automation development principles. The 9 principles are: estimate appropriately, practice the 80-20 rule, ensure stakeholder involvement, establish processes for handling defects and issues, don't overplan, empower framework developers to make their decisions, and then develop demonstrable incremental releases, integrate test automation during framework development, test data management, and minimum viable functionality, or MVF. So let's dive into those now. Principle number 1 is, practicing the 80-20 rule. And what that basically means is leave 20% of your time open to handle variances and development effort from the initial estimates, and to handle defects and issues that may come up during the sprint. In order to really get this right, you have to kind of think about this in terms of the t-shirt sizing method. What does it feel like to build an automation deliverable? Is it a small, a medium, a large, an extra large even? And it's important to have your automation development team provide their estimates, but also the QA stakeholders and the owners of the test functionality. And the reason for this is you might find quite different estimates from the different team members. It's important to know why those differences exist. Maybe your QA team member sees the testing burden as very, very complex. There's a lot of data set up, but your development team member sees it as very quick and easy to develop this framework functionality or this framework deliverable. So it's really important, if you want to get the estimates right, to kind of get everybody talking about all those factors. And another example might be, you might find that only 25%, your QA team might only have 25% of their time available to test. So you've got to talk all those things through and just do your best to estimate correctly, and leave about 20% of that time each sprint unallocated so that you can handle variances and issues. Automation isn't magic, and this kind of forces those discussions. Principle number 2, ensure stakeholder and user involvement. Good automation, it can't survive without stakeholder involvement. You want to identify who is responsible for what for both your framework development team and your customer. And an advantage of using Agile for test automation development is that it really, like I said before, it really forces this collaboration and engagement with stakeholders. It opens their eyes. They're going to recognize that automation isn't just this tool that gets installed and bam, suddenly you have automation. One way to really get to that, actually, I would not even start an Agile framework development project without first holding a kickoff meeting. And that kickoff meeting should include all your stakeholders. It should have all your QA team members, project managers, fly them in from Timbuktu. And if they happen to live in Portland, fly them in from Portland too. Bring your list of deliverables to the meeting with approximate effort levels. And if you don't have those effort levels, use that meeting to hammer out those effort levels. So get those things knocked out. Map out your sprints and deliverables during that meeting. Get a clear agreement on the approach and process and who owns what, especially things like risks and the applications under test, deliverables, where possible. Try to get all those owners assigned to all of those things. And at the end, you want to take a survey at the end of this meeting. Take a survey, have everyone hold up one hand, 0 through 5 fingers, and a confidence level. So 5 fingers, they're totally confident in this plan and the approach. 0, they lack confidence completely. Anybody that has 3 or less fingers held up, you want to talk to them in front of everybody, find out why, and address those issues right there. And then, I can't stress this enough, expect the plan to change. Anybody involved in Agile is going to know this, but expect your plan to change. And of course, on the flip side of this, at the end of your project, you want to hold a retrospective. And I would argue, even if you can hold retrospectives after sprints, do that and learn from your deltas. So, it's really key. I've as an example, a story here, I've seen a framework implemented for a company where all the primary stakeholders were in one department, and the rollout in that department went great, but there wasn't enough collaboration or buy-in when that framework was being rolled out to other departments of the company, so it went it was a lot more painful than it needed to be. So, and the reason for that is the people that you didn't engage, they have unrealistic expectations. They're under-engaged stakeholders. It's a bad thing. So make sure that you engage everyone from the beginning on your project. Principle number 3, you want to handle your defects and issues. So you want processes for that. You're building a test automation framework, so you're going to have framework defects. You're also going to run into hurdles and issues like unforeseen issues with the application under test. Maybe it's not working correctly and you need workarounds to these problems. Following these 9 principles we're going through is going to give you room to deal with these issues. And you want to focus on building for velocity. So don't sacrifice velocity. Use the slack time to fix only the critical things, that 20% and the 80-20 rule I just talked about. And then you need to put everything else in the backlog. Get your stakeholders to buy into the approach of putting things that aren't critical in the backlog at the kickoff meeting. So, backlog, backlog, backlog. Get comfortable with putting things in the backlog and make sure your customer is too. Oh, principle number 4. I love Dwight's quote on this. I've always found that a plan is useless, but the act of planning is indispensable. That couldn't be more true in Agile. Or today, again, I say in the ADD world in which we live. He was right. And Agile fits into that quote, that methodology, that idea perfectly. Don't overplan. Plan only as much as you need to. The purpose for building automation in Agile is usually to get things done quickly. And if you know about Agile, Agile is sort of like planning to replan, because plans change. Deliverables change, desires, requirements, all those things change. And what often happens is, the day you start automation with Agile and the customer sees what automation is or can be, they usually change what they want. Agile plays very well into this kind of changing dynamic. Okay. Principle number 5, empower your framework developers to make technical decisions, make decisions. So your automation resources, they need their freedom. There's no Dwight Eisenhower quote on this, but make sure your customer is involved, but the technical decisions have to be left to your automation developers. And again, at the kickoff meeting, stress this. We're trusting our developers to implement the right solution for our customer. We don't want the customer thinking about, how are we going to get the test tool to touch the application and all these other little technical nuances. That's for your development team of the framework. On one of the early automation projects I've seen, we found that there was a lot of technical docs that were provided to the customer, and they got used to sort of picking through every small little detail on the documents, and even got comfortable in thinking they could make technical decisions on the project. Needless to say, that's a really bad standard to set, and it can slow things down. You'll have to explain everything. Not a good place to be. Principle number 6. You want to establish incremental, demonstrable, measurable, demonstrable releases. Releases you can demonstrate. So we like to get deliverable design at the beginning, a sign-off on deliverable design at the beginning of a sprint. So all of our deliverables for the test automation framework, at the beginning of a sprint, when we start developing those deliverables, we want to get sign-off on the approach, the general approach. Again, not an overly complex technical design that's going to be nitpicked through, but a general approach. You get that sign-off. And the nice thing is here is we also try to get a sign-off on the deliverable at the end. So when it's functional, it really helps us to get the customer involved in using it. And it doesn't, it's a demonstration of it, but it's not just a demonstration, it's training. So, and that's really a perfect segue to the next slide, which is principle 7. which is integration of test automation during framework development. Regression tests, they're the final validation points of the framework development. And the benefit of using Agile for test framework development is that it enables getting the customer involved very early in using the framework to build tests. And it sort of kills multiple birds with one stone, as I was saying, because it gives you working tests while you're still in development, and it also trains your customer on how to set up tests, in addition to helping them find defects, not only in your framework, but also in the applications under test. And it helps them discover, remember, this is a discovery process all along, it helps them discover what they really want earlier. So, with that, I'll talk about, one of our clients, which is in a really great goal state, to get to with respect to this. That they have a 3-to-2 ratio of developers to testers, not that that really applies, but their framework's constantly in development, and they have tens of thousands of automated tests that are constantly in maintenance. They have fully integrated their testing and maintenance of tests into their automation development process. So when a new feature is developed, many of the automated tests that they have for that feature are written before that application under test feature is in production. Now that is a really good goal state to be at. So they're constantly maintaining and their test automation framework. It's constantly in development. And a good starting point on how to get there is really to start integrating your testing into framework development. Principle number 8, test data management. So with test data management, the key here, test data is a really important thing. The key here is to treat test data almost as a non-functional user story and deal with it at the beginning. Assign owners to test data, and certainly, different types of test data, but make sure that if there's certain areas of test data, system data, auto-generated data, users, passwords, things like that, that you've got people assigned ownership to those things, but deal with it at the beginning. Have a plan on how you're going to deal with it at the beginning of your project, and a good approach to that is kind of treat it like a non-functional user story. Okay, principle number 9, MVF. MVF, minimum viable functionality. If anybody's familiar with the lean methodology, MVP, minimum viable product, this is essentially the same thing. And I love the diagram here. The diagram really speaks to what you're trying to achieve. So, I talked about incremental, demonstrable releases, things like that. MVF is that minimum viable functionality for each deliverable. So, you want to get things done fast in automation. You want to put additional stuff or desirable stuff or, less than critical defects. You want to put that stuff in the backlog. You don't want to be re-architecting every time you deploy. But, that lean methodology I talked about, you want to establish something that's functional that they can use in each deliverable. And we have a project running right now that really enabled our customer to start using the test automation framework about 3 sprints into the project. It might have been 2 to 3 sprints in, and we realized that a number of the things that they wanted, or things that they thought they wanted, were less important, and elements in the backlog sort of got booted to high priority. So, your customer should define perfection. So what we did in that project is we booted stuff to that they thought they wanted, that they found out they didn't want, got booted into the backlog, and then some elements in the backlog replaced those things. And you want to build something for your customer that they can get their hands dirty with. So by taking a minimum viable functionality for each deliverable, it's usually enough that they can start using it. Don't be afraid, again, to tell them to put stuff in the backlog. Don't compromise velocity. Okay, those are the 9 principles. I do want to talk a little bit about gotchas just briefly. Couple things. Technical debt's a big one here. There's a number of other things, and they apply to general development projects. Your environments. Understanding how to estimate. Domain knowledge. Your team may not have the domain knowledge on the application under test. Customer involvement. All of those are issues. Technical debt's a big one. When you're building a test automation framework with Agile, I talk about velocity, but you gotta find a balance. Don't try to establish such a velocity that you're compromising the quality and you have to re-architect things later on. So just be aware of that. You want velocity, but you also don't want to be going at a breakneck pace that's going to accrue technical debt. Okay, some other things to consider is, maintenance is a big one. You want to consider maintenance up front, not only of your test framework, but, also your automated tests. That's a kind of an important issue. Think about the processes for maintenance. What resources are you going to need for maintenance? Not only, again, of your test automation framework, but also of your automated test in that framework. Okay, and so here's our principles again. And with that, I think I'm going to spend a little bit of time looking at some questions that may have come in and thinking about some answers here. And certainly, if you have any questions right now, you can always type those in too, and I'll look through, and I'm going to try to get to as many of those as I can. So, okay, here's a question. How do I transition from my current ad hoc or waterfall style of automation into the Agile approach? Thinking about that one. So there's a lot here. So I guess let me step out of the Agile world and think about this for a minute. So you would want to start implementing elements from Agile into your project or part of your project. Like a high-level plan for the project, maybe taking some things and breaking some things into sprints. And, maybe don't think about your entire project. Think about a piece of functionality, and can you apply Agile to that? Execute some small, short duration sprints, and then review your results. Hold a retrospective. And again, minimum viable functionality is key here. So you want to make it usable for the end users as soon as possible. So try to put something together that your end user can use. And train your team. Don't set expectations. If you're new to Agile, get some training. But we aren't Agile experts. We're just applying Agile principles. You don't have to become a Scrum Master for this, but start small. Other questions. What are the best tools to use for Agile automation? Well, this is for automation tools. It's kind of like asking, is Java or C# better for development? It really doesn't matter. It's more about the processes you put in place. So from an Agile management perspective, the effort's kind of light in terms of resources. And we've been using, from a management perspective, tools like Jira, TFS, HP Agile Manager. There are different tools out there you can use for Agile management. So sometimes 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Other questions? Are there ever times that Agile is not the right implementation approach for automation? Well, I would probably say if you're in the middle of building something, you don't want to just stop and switch to Agile. Be aware that, if you change methodologies, it's going to impact the team. Most automation implementations are going to lend themselves well to the Agile approach. So we've found. But don't just stop and suddenly switch from ad hoc or waterfall to Agile. That's probably high impact. And again, you can go back to, I think I answered the first question. You could take a piece of a project and start implementing Agile into it to test Agile within a larger project, for example. And I know I answered a few questions. I know there's a few more. We will be getting back to everyone else on all of the other questions that are coming in. And again, if you have interest in good automation, you can always reach out to our team and send a note to us. So thank you.
Thanks very much for joining us today for our webinar. We'll be making this available on our website for future viewing, and we'll make sure that we follow up with all the questions. Thanks again for your time today.